The hearing room on Capitol Hill was unusually tense that morning. Whispers bounced off marble walls, and the steady tapping of pens against notepads filled the air like distant thunder. Karoline Leavitt sat confidently before the congressional panel, her eyes sharp and unflinching. Her reputation had been building for months, fierce, calculated, and with a tongue that knew no leash. As she adjusted her microphone, the room grew quieter. Across from her, Senator John Neely Kennedy leaned back, the slight squint in his eyes unreadable. Everyone expected Karoline to come out swinging. What they didn't expect was how far she would go. "I find it ironic," she began, voice clear and biting, "that Senator Kennedy speaks of American values and family decency when even his own relatives have distanced themselves from him, if they're not too embarrassed to speak at all." The sentence dropped like a lead weight. You could hear a chair creak as someone shifted uncomfortably. Kennedy didn't move. He simply blinked, once slowly, but said nothing. And then a man stood up. He had been seated near the back, unnoticed until now. Clean cut in a navy blazer, with tired eyes and a calm expression, he walked forward, not hurried, but with purpose. The guards glanced toward the panel, uncertain whether to intervene. No one had told them to stop him, and he looked so ordinary. But there was something in the way he held himself, like a man who had held his silence for too long. "Excuse me," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, soft and resolute. Karoline's gaze snapped toward him. Kennedy's eyes finally registered surprise. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "If stories like this intrigue you," the narrator's voice breaks in briefly, "don't forget to subscribe to the channel now for more gripping political narratives." The man stepped closer. "My name," he continued, "is Thomas Kennedy. Most people call me Tommy." Silence fell again. Only this time it was heavier, more intentional. "I'm John Kennedy's nephew," he said. "And I don't give a damn about politics today." Karoline leaned back slightly, assessing him. There was no smugness in his voice, no hint of drama, just something raw, something unpolished. "I came here to listen. I didn't plan to speak. But what you just said about his family, about us, that crossed a line." Karoline opened her mouth, but he held up a hand, not to silence her, but to continue before the storm broke loose. "You don't know me, Miss Leavitt, and you certainly didn't know my mother, John's sister. She passed away last year, quietly, without asking for the spotlight. She was proud of her brother, even when they disagreed. She wasn't embarrassed by him. She loved him. And we loved her." The senator's jaw tightened. He still hadn't spoken. "You want to win points," Tommy said, voice steady. "Fine. But you don't get to use our grief for your political theater. Not today." Somewhere near the media row, a camera clicked. Someone gasped, barely audible. Karoline glanced down at her notes, her poise momentarily faltering. But Tommy was already turning, already finished. The room was no longer focused on Karoline. All eyes followed the man walking back to his seat, each step echoing against polished stone. And in that moment, a whisper of truth floated through the chamber. Some names carry weight not because of power or politics, but because of the quiet people who carry them with honor. And Karoline Leavitt, sharp, unshaken, unrelenting, was suddenly very alone in her spotlight. For a long moment, Tommy Kennedy sat silently, hands resting on his knees, eyes cast forward but unfocused. The weight of his words had not just silenced the room, it had stirred something deeper. But who was he really? And why had he chosen that moment to speak after so many years away? The truth was far more complicated than anyone expected. Tommy hadn't seen his uncle in nearly a decade. Once a bright, impassioned academic with a future in public policy, he had quietly vanished from Washington circles after a bitter family fallout. It wasn't about money or political views or the kind of surface-level spats that dominate the news cycle. It had been about dignity. About the slow erosion of a family's private sorrow beneath the weight of public expectation. His mother, Elaine Kennedy, had been the anchor of the family. Quiet, devoted, with a spine of iron hidden behind gentle eyes. She had protected her brother's reputation even when she disagreed with his politics. She had believed in the good in him even when others questioned it. And when she died, not a single news outlet mentioned her name. Tommy hadn't come to that hearing for drama. He had flown in from Oregon after reading one too many headlines, dragging his family's name for cheap points. He thought he would just watch, bear witness. Instead, he found himself standing up. Karoline Leavitt across the room was struggling to reset. She whispered to an aide, eyes scanning her notes again. But it was clear she hadn't expected the name Thomas Kennedy to surface. Not there, not like that. Tommy finally spoke again, this time quieter, to a reporter who had followed him out into the hallway. "My mother kept boxes of letters," he said. "Correspondence between her and John over the years. Some were warm, others less so. But they were real, and they showed how much she believed in family and loyalty even when it hurt." The reporter asked if he planned to speak to his uncle. Tommy shook his head. "I didn't come for a reunion. I came because that woman tried to drag my mother's memory through the mud to win a headline, and I couldn't let that happen." Inside the chamber, Karoline attempted to regain her footing. She offered a clarification, not quite an apology. She claimed she was simply highlighting political hypocrisy, not attacking any private individuals. But it was too late. The story had shifted. Back in the hallway, Tommy leaned against a marble column and closed his eyes. "I stayed away because I didn't want to be a pawn in all this," he said to no one in particular. "But there's something about grief. It makes cowards out of us when we stay silent." His phone buzzed, a text from an old college friend. "That was powerful. Proud of you." He ignored it. In the press gallery, journalists began piecing together his identity. Academic journals, op-eds, even a TED Talk from 7 years prior surfaced online. He had once been considered a rising star in public ethics before retreating into quiet research and community work. But now, whether he liked it or not, his name was back. Karoline, unaware of the depth of the story unfolding outside, sat frozen. The words she had weaponized had awakened a storm she hadn't anticipated, a storm not of rage, but of memory. And Tommy, standing alone near the exit, realized something else. He hadn't just spoken for his mother. He had spoken for every name used and discarded by a system that forgot the weight behind words. Tommy Kennedy didn't return to the hearing room that day. He walked the Capitol halls for a while instead, lost in thought, unnoticed by most. But inside that chamber, his presence lingered like the echo of an unresolved truth. Karoline Leavitt had recovered just enough composure to move on to her next point, but the conviction was gone from her voice. The sharpness that once turned heads now landed hollow. She wasn't used to facing counterpunches she couldn't control. And she definitely wasn't used to being blindsided by someone who spoke from a place no data sheet could predict: grief. That evening, a clip of Tommy's words went viral. News outlets labeled him the man who silenced Karoline Leavitt. But that wasn't the whole truth. Tommy hadn't tried to silence anyone. He'd done something rarer. He'd humanized a debate that had become too political to feel anything at all. The next morning, documents began circulating online. Old letters, emails, even audio recordings Tommy had quietly provided to a journalist he trusted. Not as ammunition, but as context. In them, Elaine Kennedy spoke about her brother's struggles, about his choices, and about the pain of being misrepresented by people who never knew her. One letter stood out. It was dated 7 years prior, handwritten in neat cursive. In it, Elaine wrote, "I don't always agree with John's policies, but I remember when we were children how he stayed up all night with me when I was sick. Politics didn't make him that man. Heart did. And I hope the world sees that someday." The letter circulated quickly, reframing a figure many had only known through political headlines. It didn't absolve Senator Kennedy of criticism, but it added a missing layer, a heartbeat beneath the rhetoric. Inside party circles, some began questioning Karoline's tactics. Her brilliance in controlling narratives had always been admired, but now people whispered, had she gone too far? Had ambition eclipsed basic decency? Karoline, alone in her office, reread Tommy's statement over and over. She wasn't rattled because she had been challenged. She was used to that. What unnerved her was how calm he had been, how devastatingly honest. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't insulted. He had just spoken, and it had cut deeper than anything she'd prepared for. She turned to her screen and began searching. She found his old lectures, interviews, a panel he'd once led on ethics and empathy in governance. He spoke differently back then, younger, more hopeful, but even then his words carried weight. "We can't demand better leaders if we reward the ones who weaponize pain," he had said during one seminar. She closed the tab. Later that afternoon, an invitation arrived in Tommy's inbox from a popular podcast requesting an interview. He declined. Instead, he sent a short email to the host. This wasn't about going public. It was about protecting someone who couldn't defend herself. Karoline remained silent. Publicly, she issued a short clarification statement reiterating that her remarks were political in nature, not personal. But the damage was done. Something had shifted. Back at his temporary hotel room, Tommy sat by the window watching the city buzz beneath him. He thought about his mother's handwriting, about her laughter, about how many times she had asked him to give people the benefit of the doubt. For a moment, he wondered what she would think of what he had done. And in that quiet, unresolved space, one thing became clear. The storm hadn't passed. It was only beginning to rise. The headlines weren't kind. Leavitt misfires in emotional standoff. Kennedy nephew dismantles political smear. Silence from senator, truth from family. The media storm wasn't just about policy anymore, it was personal. And Karoline Leavitt was at the center. Behind the scenes, internal emails leaked. Messages sent from Karoline's team before the hearing revealed a strategy memo. Apply pressure to Kennedy's soft side. Family angle is vulnerable. Use with caution, but directness. It wasn't just calculated. It was cold. The revelation lit a fuse. Public support, once a pillar beneath her rising stardom, began to crumble. Allies distanced themselves subtly at first. Fewer retweets, no public comments. Then more openly, with statements condemning personal attacks as out of bounds. She tried to regroup, to fight back with new messaging. But the tone had shifted. No message could rewrite what had been exposed. Meanwhile, Senator Kennedy remained silent. Days passed. Commentators speculated. Would he defend Karoline? Attack her? Clarify the rift with his nephew? But the senator said nothing. Until Thursday morning. It wasn't a press conference. There were no lights, no fanfare. It was a routine session, expected to be dry, procedural. But when Kennedy took the floor, the chamber stilled. "I've been in this business a long time," he began, voice low and steady. "And I've learned that when people come after you, it usually means you're doing something right or something they don't like." A few chuckles rippled through the room. "But today, I won't talk about politics. I want to talk about family." The air changed. He paused, gathering himself. His voice, usually crisp with wit, softened. "My sister Elaine was the best of us. Quiet, decent, unshakably kind. She never wanted attention. She never raised her voice, but she raised me. And when she died, part of me went with her." No one moved. "My nephew Tommy, he and I haven't always seen eye to eye. That's no secret. But I want everyone in this chamber to know. He loved his mother with a kind of reverence I wish this world saw more of. And what he said earlier this week, every word of it was true." The silence deepened. "You can disagree with me. You can challenge my votes, my speeches, my philosophy, but don't twist the memory of someone who lived with grace. Don't do that just to win a moment on camera." A few hands moved to wipe eyes. Even seasoned journalists sat still, their pens lowered. "I've been called a lot of things in this job, some of them fair, some of them not, but this one cuts deeper, because it wasn't just about me. It was about her, and she never asked for this fight." He stepped back. That was all. No grandstanding, no attack. Just truth, unvarnished. Outside the chamber, reactions were immediate. A surge of support flooded in, not just for Kennedy, but for the dignity he showed. Old clips of him and his sister circulated. one from a local fundraiser years ago where Elaine introduced him shyly before slipping out of frame. Karoline watched it from her phone alone in her apartment. Her hands trembled. The story wasn't about her anymore. It had become something else. Something she hadn't anticipated. Something she couldn't control. And for the first time in her career, Karoline Leavitt didn't know what to say. In the days that followed Senator Kennedy's speech, the political firestorm settled into something quieter, something more reflective. It wasn't just the press or the public that had shifted. It was the tone in the hallways, the pause before a pointed remark, the unspoken reminder that some boundaries once crossed leave more than just a bruise. Karoline Leavitt submitted her resignation that Friday. It wasn't forced. No formal statement demanded it. But she knew. Her power had always come from precision, knowing how far to push without losing control. But this time, she'd gone too far. And there was no reclaiming the narrative. She released a brief message. "I regret the way my words were interpreted. I accept full responsibility and step away to reflect." It was clinical, safe. But beneath it, even her most loyal supporters could sense it, the weight of something learned too late. Meanwhile, Tommy Kennedy returned to Oregon. He didn't take interviews, didn't post on social media. But something had changed. The silence he once sought now felt different, not like refuge, but like surrender. And he wasn't willing to surrender anymore. He began drafting a proposal for a foundation in his mother's name. Not flashy, not political. A simple mission to support families of public servants dealing with grief, isolation, and trauma in silence. It wasn't about legacy. It was about healing, about giving voice to people like Elaine, who had stood behind great men and never asked for anything in return. Back in Washington, Senator Kennedy took the floor again a week later, this time to introduce a bipartisan bill aimed at expanding mental health support for families of government workers and veterans. He didn't mention Tommy. He didn't have to. Everyone in that chamber knew what had sparked the initiative. After the session, Kennedy left through a side exit and walked toward a quiet corner of the building where Tommy waited. They hadn't spoken since the hearing. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Kennedy nodded. "She'd be proud," he said. Tommy looked away, hands in his coat pockets. "Took me too long to do something." "Better late than never," his uncle replied. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't reconciliation wrapped in a bow. But it was something. A recognition, an understanding that the past would never be fully resolved. But it didn't need to be in order to move forward. They stood there, not as senator and citizen, but as two men who had loved the same woman in different ways. As Tommy turned to leave, Kennedy called out softly, "You did good, kid." Tommy smiled without turning back. It was enough. In the weeks that followed, the news cycle moved on. Other hearings, other scandals. But for those who had watched this moment unfold, it lingered, an unexpected lesson carved into the chaos. That sometimes the most powerful voice isn't the loudest. Sometimes truth arrives not with fury, but with a whisper. And sometimes standing up, when no one expects you to, can change everything. If this story moved you, subscribe now and never miss another unforgettable real-life drama. Want to explore another story of political redemption? Click the video on screen now to continue the journey.